Hi everyone and welcome to episode 122 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. Well, I seem to say it every week, but the Melbourne property market's very interesting at the moment. The clearance rates are something that I've observed and been keeping a pretty close eye on, and from what I've seen from the start of the year, where sort of mid-February when the first main auction weekend started, we were seeing clearance rates of pushing towards 70. They were certainly in the high 60s. But last weekend it's dropped now down to as low as 53%. So it's certainly trending backwards, and that's obviously evidenced by the market activity that we're seeing at the moment. So you'd say at best at the start of the year, the Melbourne market, was in average condition, but certainly with the budget release and things over the past 2 to 3 weeks, things have contracted or certainly tightened up further from there. Now, and it probably leads further to what we've been saying for a couple of years now, that the Melbourne market is good value from a value proposition perspective, and it is, if you're in the position, a good time to be buying. And we've certainly started to hear and have conversations with financial planners and accountants that we deal with, and they're having discussions with clients now where, from a property perspective, rather than perhaps if all of these proposed changes do go through from a budget point of view, that what are the alternates in terms of having exposure to residential property, and some of that is focusing more towards the family home, and whether or not it's not certainly fixed yet, but certainly some of the discussions have been around whether or not to have the exposure from a residential property point of view focused more on the family home, and perhaps investing more in that, whether it's renovating or perhaps stretching a bit further to buy a better home, given the tax-free environment that the family home sits in. So that could form part of a strategy and really pushing to buy something at the peak of capacity, and having that as your principal residential property focus and looking at alternate investment strategies. But there's still certainly a place and some of the strategies around still buying investment properties as well. So it's just a really interesting time in some of the conversations. But what we do find in some of these uncertain times, and we've seen this over a long period of time, is that quite commonly, particularly for expats and things, our inquiry for expats looking to come home and buy homes tends to go up. That uncertainty brings about people thinking about, well, perhaps I'll look for something that gives me comfort, gives me certainty, gives me security, and coming home can sometimes be that. So it obviously will depend on what's going on lifestyle-wise, but we've certainly started to see a bit of an uptick in that over the last 6 months or so. And so there's obviously, if you are looking as an expat to come back to Melbourne to buy a family home and re-establish yourself into the market, there are a lot of considerations that need to be made. It's really not as straightforward as perhaps upsizing or downsizing from an existing home when you're already living here. There's a lot of other considerations that need to be made, not least to the fact that you're not here to be able to do a lot of things. So number of things, and I thought today might be a good day to go over some of those options. So the first one is why people make the decision, and obviously that can vary from case to case and person to person as to the reason why, but it might just be as simple as a change of circumstance. So it could be that you've received a new job opportunity at home and looking for that to take that up, a promotion and move back home. There could be issues around visas and perhaps whether or not you've stayed the full length of time, and perhaps it's just that time and it's got to that point where it's time to move home. It could be a relationship from a personal perspective, a change in relationship status, which has led to, okay, well, it's time to take home. Other ones, and probably more common, is if you've been overseas for a while and started a family, is that quite commonly people would prefer or might like the idea of schooling their children back in Australia. So it gets to that point of, okay, the kids are getting closer to school age. Perhaps we need to start thinking and making the decision around moving home. So what do we need to take into account? So school locations, those sorts of things. But it's not just around necessarily the education. Sometimes it's from a social perspective, and being at an Australian school might be the priority for you or for your kids for that reason. Sometimes it's other family members. So obviously, when you get to that point, there's aging parents and wanting to spend more time, perhaps support them given what they've probably supported you with over younger years. But also, if you do have kids, letting grandparents spend a lot of quality time with their grandchildren as well. But quite commonly also, it's just around familiarity and security, particularly if it is in an uncertain time, that people might prefer to have the certainty of living back home in the country they grew up in. The next one is, when does it happen? And this is a really important one. It's something that's vital to plan out as to when you want to do this in terms of buying the property. And there are many things that you'll need to take into account if that's what you want to do. And it really depends on, in quite a lot of circumstances, why you're making the move. So do you have somewhere else to stay immediately? So when you're coming home, are you going to need to move straight into this new home, or are you going to rent for a period of time, or do you have a pre-existing home that you had before you left that you can move back into, or are you going to stay with friends or family? So planning around that, around where you will go immediately when you get back, is a really important part. If you have children, as we said before, around schooling, so do you need to plan to where they're going to go to be at school as soon as they come back, or have you given yourself enough time that you can do a bit of research when you get back? Perhaps they're only 3 or 4, so it's getting back a year or two early. Are you going to have to look for a job? And if so, and if you are looking for a job, if you're then looking to buy, is there going to be a period of time where perhaps finance might not be as straightforward, and you may need to get a proven track record of income, that sort of thing, to be able to then achieve the finance that you're after? So there's those sorts of things as well. And how far out are you going to need to make this purchase? So is it something that you'll do in a year or two's time once you've been back? Or do you need to buy 6 months before you're moving home so that you can have a property settle and then be ready to move into it? So there's planning around that side of it as well. And then, are you planning to buy remotely, or will you wait till you get back? So as I said, there's a lot to do if you're looking at buying in Melbourne. A lot of particularly family homes sell via auction. So how are you going to address that process as well? The next one is, where are you going to look to buy? And I think location is probably one of the key characteristics when people buy from overseas, particularly if they haven't been living back in the country for an extended period of time, because a lot does change over those sorts of time frames. So those considerations are really important. What you were used to perhaps before you left, where your friends were, where your family were, what was important to you at that point in time, can change pretty dramatically over if you're away for a number of years. So friends can quite often move away. They may not be living in the same locations, even within Melbourne, that they were. They'll probably have different friendship groups, perhaps, to what they had as time progresses. You start to move in or move along with children's friends, that sort of thing. So that can change a bit, and there's different priorities. So what you had in common before you left may be a little bit different by the time you get back. So making decisions around what things used to be like can be a little bit risky, because it may not be the same as what it was when you left. Family, you may need assistance. So being perhaps when you were younger and you perhaps wanted to be further away from your parents, but now that you're getting home, you might need their support. They might need yours as well. So taking into account considerations around where they are and what they'll need plays into that as well. And then obviously, what sort of priorities do you have from a lifestyle perspective? So is public transport going to be really important to you? Do you no longer need to be in the same street as a pub in Fitzroy, but perhaps you want to be close to public transport, as I said before, and parklands? Park and running may not have been important, but it may be for your children. So there's different aspects that you may not have considered previously that you may want to prioritise coming home. The next one that I think is really important is, what type of property do you want to look for? And that's a really important consideration. And what do you want to prioritise out of that? So is it a house? Do you want to be in a townhouse, given that you've perhaps been used to, in an overseas environment, living in smaller accommodation and not feeling as though you need the backyard? So perhaps apartment living is still going to be for you when you come back. But perhaps that's part of the reason, is that you're sick of that and now you do want the space. Is there a particular style of property? Do you love the Victorian style of some of Melbourne's inner city suburbs? Or would you prefer to have something that's cutting edge modern? So what's the style that's important to you? How much accommodation, bedrooms, bathrooms, multiple living zones, that sort of thing? As I said before, outdoor space, so a backyard, perhaps space to put in a pool or having a pool. And car parking is a really important thing, and you may not have considered that while you're overseas, if perhaps you were living in a fairly busy city where it wasn't necessary to have one, but coming home you may want 1 or 2 cars, and therefore where are they going to be parked? So all these sorts of considerations come into play. And it's really important to get that pretty clear in your mind before you make these decisions, because it can be, what you don't want to do is outgrow a property, so you don't make the right decisions around size, or find that a year or two down the track that you've made the wrong decisions around asset selection, which then means you need to sell and buy again, and no one needs to pay any more stamp duty than they have to. And then how? And so how do you go about this buying process? And that's a really key component to this, I think. It's pretty clear that there are a lot of services available to you to assist if you are overseas wanting to have property advisors or buyers advocates, whoever you may see necessary, in terms of giving you the assistance to enable you to buy property while you're away and get the right advice, so that when it comes to selecting the right asset, and when it comes to going through assessing value of the property and then the buying process, you've got the assistance in the right areas to make sure that you're making the right decisions, because it is a complicated process and there can be a lot of pressure involved. So making that decision is really important. You may prefer to do it yourself, and as I said before, that might be that you come back, rent for a period of time, give yourself time to get into the market, familiarise yourself with what you're after, and then be able to carry out the work and carry out the inspections and go through the due diligence process. Some people we've also seen get family members to assist them with it, or family or friends. And the risk there is that it puts a lot of pressure on those family members to make the right decisions for you. It's very time consuming buying property. So to start with, going out and inspecting a lot of property on your behalf is a big ask. But then to make sure it's the right property and go through the buying process, if they're not doing this on a regular basis, can be difficult as well. So it's not an easy thing to do. And I think planning how you want to do it and when you want to do it sort of come hand in hand to make sure that you're making the correct decisions. So yeah, look, it's a really interesting time. I think there's some great opportunities around for expats who might be coming back to look at family homes, particularly with the way the Melbourne market's shaping up at the moment. But that's probably the main key points, and make sure you do the planning before you get into the point of making a rush decision, because as we always say, buying and selling property is a really expensive exercise, so you want to make sure that you get it right from the start. So that's about it for today's episode. That's 122 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. As always, please subscribe to our channels, share the podcast far and wide so that we can increase our listener and viewership through YouTube as well. But otherwise, if you've got if you'd like further information, visit our website, wakeland.com.au. Otherwise, we wish you all the best with your property decisions.